A topic that's constantly coming up on social media amongst friends and family members is whether it still makes financial sense in the UK to go to university. And I actually thought it would be interesting to look at it because at face value, it often doesn't, especially when you compare what your debts are going to be when you finish university, the interest rates that you're paying on those debts, and also a lot of times when you actually finally are able to pay for those debts versus actually going out there, probably earning a little bit less because you're not a graduate, however, not having the debt associated with getting a university degree. So I actually thought I'd look up and calculate at what point, if at all, do you actually break even in terms of costs versus increased income from your university degree, and is it something that's worth doing? And is it something that's worth doing for some and not others? And I thought it'd be really interesting. So let's have a look at it. So look, we're making the following assumptions, and sorry if I'm looking down here. I'm just getting my calculations. So we're making a few assumptions. Now, this is in the UK, so it's going to be different in different countries. But in the UK, our tuition fees are capped at £9,250 per year. A university degree is typically 3 years. So that's £27,750 for the university tuition. You then typically have maintenance loans, which add up to roughly around £10,000 a year. Now that's for things like covering your rent, your living expenses for 3 years, which is roughly around £30,000. So if you add those two together, plus the interest that you accrue whilst you're at university, you're looking at about 57,750 in total student debt. Also, about 6,250 that you accumulate of interest whilst you're studying during those 3 years. Gives you an initial debt of roughly around £64,000. Now, let's look at some of the payment terms. So you pay 9% above £25,000 that you make, above £25,000. It's written off after 40 years, and interest average at 6.25%. Currently, it's RPI plus 3%. So that's going to change as and when rates change. Now, the best way to compare this is actually by looking at the delta of your lifetime earnings from if you are a graduate versus if you are not a graduate, okay? And a lot of this information can be hard to find. So look, please do take it with a pinch of salt. However, on average, there are average age groups where graduates and non-graduates have different incomes, and it's what's called a graduate premium, which is how much are you making versus peers in your age group that did not go to university. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here on the screen here, and as you can see, across every single age group, you actually make upwards of 45 to 70% more as a graduate versus as a non-graduate. Now, what does that actually mean in money terms? It ranges, as you can see there, between 25 and 29. You're making $20,000 a year as a non-graduate, $30,000 a year as a graduate. You're making an extra £10,000, of which you're taxed, and you're probably looking at a net difference of roughly around, at that level, maybe £7,000 a year or so. So an extra, £620 or so. Now, it gets much wider at the further end at 45 to 60. You're making an extra £21,000 a year versus your peers who did not go to university. So that gap begins to widen, the graduate premium, and it especially widens if you start getting into really in-demand or technical skill sets like software engineering, mathematics, enterprise sales, consulting, law, etc., right? Graduates typically earn anywhere from 1.1 to 1.4 million pounds in their lifetime versus 8 to 900,000 for non-graduates. So you're typically looking at a lifetime premium of £300,000 to £500,000 in lifetime earnings. As you can imagine, women earn less, anywhere from 10 to 15% less. And it widens as you get older, largely because women take time off to have children. And when they come back to work, they're often at a disadvantaged position. There's also really big differences between different fields, as I said. If you're a STEM graduate versus a normal graduate, that graduate premium can become even higher. So let's look at some of these examples. Okay, so what's really interesting is that whether it's worth it or not going into university. So for example, if you are a social sciences graduate, like geography, sociology, psychology, religious education, etc., you actually break even anywhere between 32 and 35 years old, generally because the lifetime premium of having that degree over non-graduates is roughly around £220,000 to £350,000. Now, whilst great, it may not be worth it for you to have significant debt payments for a long period of time as a result of it. You're also very unlikely to actually be able to pay that debt off, but you just get to a point where even though you're paying that debt off, your student loan debt, you're still better off than someone who didn't go to university. If you're a female graduate, unfortunately, you only break even between 35 to 38, and this is on average, because oftentimes women will take time off to have children. So those earning years that they have and that graduate premium doesn't widen the gap as much. Now, the big plus is whether you are a science, technology, engineering, or maths graduate, or a STEM graduate. Your lifetime earnings versus non-graduate can be anywhere from 800,000 to 1 million or more, and you actually break even at 26 to 27 years old. That's when you actually it starts to pay for you to have a university degree. So what do I take from that? Now, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do and whether you should do this degree or that degree or what career you should, choose to do in your life. That's a very personal choice. But what I would say is, generally speaking, it's better to go to university than not to go to university. Yes, it's extremely expensive, but you have an incredible time, you meet incredible people, you learn a lot, but also when you come out of university, you actually end up making a lot more money than people who didn't go. Number two, people who go to universities tend to have a lot more job satisfaction. So if whatever career they're pursuing and they want to do, it's very likely that they need to go to university to do it, and they don't just do whatever job they might be able to find when they're 19 or 20 and work their way up the ladder that way. So look, I think university offers a substantial financial return for most people. The only thing I would say is, if you're unsure, prioritize science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. If you have to do a psychology or any sort of social sciences degree, I'd really think about whether you actually need that degree to get the job that you want to do. Are there alternative ways to get there? Is there an apprenticeship program? Is there a program where you learn whilst on the job? Because for most people, breaking even from the university investment at 40 years old just really doesn't make that much sense. So look, I hope you found this video extremely helpful. I hope it helped you think a little bit differently about whether you should or shouldn't go to university, and hopefully you make the decision that's right for you. I hope you found this video helpful. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video.